For all of our lives, the dollar has been the king of currencies around the world. But is that about to change?
China and Brazil just agreed to trade in their own currencies.
China is now trying to replace the US dollar.
India says it is ready to trade in the rupee with countries that have dollar shortage.
I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I think I will use the word doomed in the long term.
The US dollar has been the currency to trade in between nations for decades after World War II. But since 2002, global sentiment towards the currency started changing. Recently, several nations with fast-growing economies has ditched the US dollar in favor of their own currency to trade in. This move of the nations to alternatives for international trade is de-dollarization. Is this change necessary? How will it affect the world is explored today on this episode. The trend to move away from the US dollar started in Europe, which spread over the West Asia after global issues of early 2000s. Let's check out the trends it set economically.
In October 2000, Iraq insisted on dumping the US dollars for more multilateral euro. The Iraqi account has also been earning a higher rate of interest in euros than it would have earned in dollars. In 2009, Colonel Gaddafi, then president of African Union, he suggested the states of African continent to switch to a new currency, which is called the gold dinar. Countries such as Nigeria, Tunisia, Egypt and Angola were ready to change their currencies.
The United States is sending its troops back to Iraq, and the immediate question becomes, why? So the answer might shock you. The United States and the West did not see this coming. Iraq dumps the US dollar and start trading in the Chinese yuan.
In 2018, Iran dumped the USD for its international trades. The governor of Central Bank of Iran chose euro over the US dollars. The trend continues in 2023 also, as China sold 65,000 tons of LNG in Chinese currency yuan. Following the decision taken by the Reserve Bank of India, the Indian and Malaysian traders can now build their trade in INR. Indian International Bank of Malaysia, IIBM, is the first bank in Malaysia that started this mechanism by opening a special rupee Vostro account through Union Bank of India. The move cut US dollar out of payment process.
China will also make full use of the Shanghai Petroleum and National Gas Exchange as a platform to carry out yuan settlement of oil and gas trade.
The interest in de-dollarization by energy-rich, densely populated competitors and partners of US is intense. Why is this interest slowly converting into necessity for fastest growing economies? Let's check it out in the next section. The answer to this is easy. US uses the global reserve currency for its national interest by exporting inflation and applying sanctions. How does US do it?
According to the IMF Global Debt Database, the United States of America tops the list of debts. It exceeds the total debts of developing nations combined together, which leads to bank collapses and recessions every decade, be it your Lehman Brothers collapse or recently Silicon Valley collapse.
Every time the US business houses go into recession, the US plans on saving them by printing excess US dollars. In 2021, 13 trillion were printed. Printing excess USD leads to inflation in US and all over the world, but it protects the US consumption.
The US citizens can import goods from Asia and Europe at a higher price, which increases the inflation in these countries. As more dollar floods foreign reserves of these exporting nations, the local currency loses the value due to imported inflation
that have grown dependent on it.
Certainly would reduce the value of a lot of US dollar assets, and that could create a lot of havoc in the global economy.
Anytime you have turmoil in US financial markets, that is going to spill over to the rest of the world.
The other reason is sanctions. Any step by nations which are not in US interest is sanctioned from using the US dollars to trade internationally.
In September 2022, the Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control (OFAC) sanctioned an international network of companies to end users in South and East Asia. As per the executive order of the US President, OFAC sanctioned Venezuela's oil trade.
The USA's Department of Treasury sanctioned Russia from accessing its national assets in USD. Russia had also been blocked from SWIFT network to successfully transact in USD with the clients.
But I think that we need to have a clear view about the fact that they will lead some countries to double down on de-dollarization, or they will make it difficult actually to lift sanctions in some cases. Actually, one could argue that in the case of Iran, sanctions have had such structural impacts that it will be very difficult to fully cancel their effects.
The US dollar is used as a currency to settle geopolitical issues, and no independent nation with a future want that baggage. Why did most economies submit to US dollar monopoly? A bit of history can help. USA has always been a mineral-rich nation itself. The explorers, pioneers and entrepreneurs in the US flourished in farming corns, mining gold, silver and oil. But how did it help its economic development?
Sitting on natural wealth, USA created many bankers like JP Morgan and chemical banks with huge capital, and also understood the importance of creating infrastructure. USA started as a supplier for weapons and war machinery to the British Empire, which had enough wealth generated by colonization.
This made USA a wealthy and powerful state, which determined the course of upcoming world wars from 1911 to 1945, and this led the way for the currency domination.
During World War II, the British were no more able to pay USA in cash by 1940. The USA instead took up the policy of lend and lease, got involved in war against Japanese Empire and set up the Bretton Woods Conference.
Approximately 730 delegates representing 44 countries met in Bretton Woods in July 1944 for a deal. Once implemented, it established the US dollar as international reserve currency instead of gold.
The United States sold weapons and supplies to many of its allies and collected its payments in gold. By 1947, the US had accumulated 70% of the world's gold reserves, leaving other nations with a huge disadvantage. To try to remedy this and other financial matters, 44 allied countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 1944. There, they decided that the world's currencies would be pegged to the US dollar.
In 1971, the USA's gold supply was no longer adequate to cover the number of dollars in circulation. So what they did? By 1973, the USA met with Saudi Arabia and created an agreement to trade petroleum exclusively in USDs.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
In exchange, the USA promised the Arab nations security with weapon supply. This sealed the USD as the currency to trade in globally for decades to come, and the dollar became the liquid gold known as petrodollar.
Crude oil became necessary for all the nations. The role of the US dollar as the global reserve currency was established. But how did the international trade happen before the US dollar became standard? The history continues in next section. Global trade existed for thousands of years even before the United States was founded. The Indus civilization, the Egyptian civilization, the Greeks, the Persians and the Romans all traded in their respective currencies before the medieval era. The Middle Ages brought concept of global currency in Europe, which soon spread to Asia and Americas following colonization.
From 1450 to 1530, the Portuguese currency was used as global standard. For 80 years, this was followed by Spanish currency from 1530 to 1641 and then Netherlands currency from 1642 to 1720.
Then France conquered a weak Netherlands and established its currency for global trade for 95 years. However, with the colonization of India, the British established the British pound as a global reserve currency for 129 years from 1815 to 1944.
Your honors should know by experience that trade in Asia must be driven and maintained under the protection and favor of your honors' own weapons, and that the weapons must be paid for by the profits from the trade, so that we cannot carry on trade without war, nor war without trade.
The global reserve currency kept changing every 100 years. The USD is just 78 years into its life as a global currency. It is facing massive de-dollarization measures.
Can the ancient civilizations like India and China bring back the trading in local currencies and make the US dollar as the last currency for economic colonization? Let's check out how serious are China and India regarding their steps to dethrone the US dollar. In years after 2002, US established manufacturing industries in China for electronics and daily commodities which were traded in US dollars world over. Everything was perfect. The Chinese business houses were taking over the US companies with its newfound money until the COVID-19 pandemic. How will China return the favor?
After COVID-19, many American manufacturing companies are shifting their factories back to home from China. This is enough to create mass unemployment in China, and it can cause loss of confidence in the Chinese government.
China is promoting yuan in its global trade to bypass US sanctions. According to a report in Foreign Policy magazine, China wants yuan to grow as an international currency to settle its cross-border trades, but not to dethrone the USD itself.
However, the USA's involvement in Taiwan and its disagreement with One China policy has forced China to secure Chinese trade in case of conflict. Chinese President Xi, he asserted the need of changes which did not happen for 100 years during his recent visit in Russia.
So the Chinese and their infrastructure companies to Saudi Arabia, and in exchange Saudi Arabia sends oil. So there are a lot of models that could apply here.
But there are many nations which do not trust China to hold its currency as a reserve. This brings us to next big de-dollarization force, India. Through a notification dated on July 11, 2022, the RBI has enabled international trade settlements between India and other countries. Has this step found any subscribers to the Indian rupees? Let's find out.
18 nations, which include Russia, UAE, UK, Germany and Israel, have agreed to trade in Indian rupees. The Indian currency has taken foothold in nations both aligned with the USD and in favor of de-dollarization.
UPI, that is Unified Payment Interface, which is digital payment system introduced by Reserve Bank of India called RBI, has now found acceptance internationally. And the Singapore-based payment interface PayNow, it has been linked with the UPI.
Several nations have their domestic digital payment interface like FPS of Russia and NeoPay of UAE, which are waiting to be linked with India's UPI. This will let several other nations join India's payment interfacing to completely bypass the SWIFT system for payment.
By Singapore's NETS and India's MPCI International Payments Limited to foster cross-border interoperability of card and QR code payments.
India has started the journey of globalizing the rupee in a perfect way. Nations of ASEAN and Africa are already involved with rupee and UPI in bypassing US reserve currency's limitations. But if US loses its dollar advantage, will it remain a superpower? Or will it have to share its status with the other nations too? Let's conclude. As of now, no single currency possesses any immediate threat to the US dollar. But collectively, the euro and the BRICS reserve currency, which is to be introduced in some time, would be able to end the US dollar monopoly in several regions of the world.
USA will no longer defend the West Asian OPEC, since the West Asian nations are turning away from the promised 1973 agreement.
With increasing space industries, India is also creating a market for self-developed weapon internationally. The rupee is set up to be an important currency globally as a result.
We have to reduce our dependencies if you want to preserve the European identity. Otherwise, we will progressively be dependent on everything.
A new global order is emerging as the dollar is set to run out of its monopoly. The US dollar will not die so long USA remains, but it will stop being a geopolitical tool to manipulate the global economy. If you like the video, share it with everyone. Subscribe the channel. If you like, you can support us through Patreon. Links are in the description and pinned comment. We'll be back soon with a new issue.